You know, initially I had a huge over 40-minute long review of DD2 planned. Hell, I even wrote a script and recorded all of the voiceover, however, in the end, I wasn't really happy with it. The thing is that as I worked on that video, the game changed more and more as it was still in early access, and eventually, the devs decided to completely rethink their approach to the game in response to the fan feedback, and so the entire roadmap that they unveiled was scrapped. As a result, the earlier points I made got more and more outdated, until eventually I had to face the reality that the whole thing needed to be rebuilt from the start, thoroughly, meticulously and with great attention to detail. So after some reasonable revisions, please enjoy a random collection of my thoughts in no particular order. First, I'll say up front, I like the game, so if you hear me whine about it for a particularly long period of time, just know this. It's easy to summarize why something works, but it takes more time to explain why it doesn't. You don't wonder how your lung works until it suddenly collapses and you're left gasping for air at 3 AM at Wendy's with a circle of hobos chanting around you. So at launch the game was in a bit of an odd place. Chris Bourassa and Tyler Zygmunt, the founders of Red Hook and the primary creators of Darkest Dungeon, often made it a point that they didn't want to make a Darkest Dungeon 1.5. Instead, they wanted to make a sequel that wouldn't replace the original, as it often happens in the video game industry. What they sought to do was to create a game that would take the series in a brand new direction while simultaneously preserving those aspects of it that the fans came to love and expect. Did they succeed? Well, let's take a bit of a closer look and see what happened. When the first trailer dropped, people were excited. Some of them even a bit too excited. The graphics switched from the 2D sort of a cartoonish pop-up book look from the first game into a full 3D style. When that was first announced, a lot of people were skeptical, including myself. It was a part of the distinct identity of the first game, and furthermore, it made it easier for the modding community to add new content, and modding was a huge part of the original success. Red Hook seemed to be aware of these concerns. As such, they knew that they had to nail the graphics to make the transition worth it. And so they did. They managed to preserve a portion of the Darkest Dungeon art style that has captivated so many people, which was no easy task. The VFX, a work of the well-known modder Marvin Sayo, who had actually joined Red Hook for a time, was particularly impressive and added a lot to the overall presentation. However, as a downside, not only the switch to 3D made modding the game much more difficult, but the creators also revealed that characters such as the Houndmaster and the Abomination were much less likely to make a return, because they would basically require twice as much work due to their nature. The Houndmaster has a dog, obviously, and Abomination has two forms, and these mean extra modeling, rigging, animating, all that shebang. Now, as much as I like the graphics, I don't really think that the sacrifice in creativity was worth it. I hope that this is something that Red Hook addresses in the future. Moving on, the enemy design overall is fairly pleasing. For an early access, the game has a pretty good roster of bad guys and monstrosities, with each area having its own unique monsters to fight, as well as some common grunts that appear everywhere. Of particular note are the cultists, whose visual design makes for a nice progression from the ones that we saw in the first game, specifically the horrors that we witnessed in the Darkest Dungeon location. These abominations truly feel like the emissaries of a malevolent force that was unleashed onto the world, and I really enjoy their aesthetic. That's not to say that there aren't some bland enemies that are easily forgettable, and there are also some designs that are just not very good. We'll talk about that a little bit later. The music, once again composed by Stuart Chatwood, is once again brilliant and atmospheric. Though at times I feel that something may be missing. Perhaps it's just me, but I can't really recall a lot of the soundtrack the way I could with the original, especially the Color of Madness tracks. Those were basically made to be listened to over and over because of their purpose within that DLC. Still, it's nothing bad, perhaps just not as memorable as its predecessor. Speaking of which, many sound effects from the original are used to better connect the two, and I'm always a sucker for that kind of thing. I think that the sound effects can do a lot to improve the mood of the game. Speaking of mood, nobody could forget the return of Wayne June as the game's narrator, though a different character this time. More on that later.
Get on with it! Yes, get on with it!
The combat from the first game returns, though with some major changes introduced. The developers admitted that the accuracy system from the first game, which I personally liked, but oh well, wasn't entirely fair and could lead to some broken situations, so they decided to replace it with a system of tokens. A blindness token reduces the characters, or enemies, chance of hitting their target by 50%, while a dodge token applied to a character, or enemy, reduces their chance of being hit by 50%. I am of two minds about that change because, while at first switching to tokens sounded like a good idea, in practice it just turned that whole thing into a coin toss. Now, you can say the original system was busted all you want, but at the end of the day, the game was still a joy to play. I could get rhyming out of the script, but this video is late already, so fuck it, I'll make it a feature. In this scenario, it just causes this salty feeling where seemingly all your dodges always flip in the enemy's favor. All your blindness tokens cripple you, and the enemy manages to get out of the way most of the time. This is of course par for the course, as randomness will end up feeling unfair most of the time. And one could try and apply this argument back to the more loosely based chance system in the original, but at least back then I could improve my odds. Anyway, once the developers made that change, they decided to translate a lot of other mechanics from DD1 into this new token system, and here it turned out a bit better, I think. There are now skills in the game that utilize tokens in various interesting ways, like the Highwayman being able to steal tokens, which is both awesome as well as thematically appropriate, and that feels like a nice new addition to the overall gameplay formula. Another thing that you'll notice is the introduction of combat items, which can be equipped by your characters to be used on their turns. Their utility will vary greatly, but I think that overall Red Hook did a decent job of making most of them useful, though some are definitely more useful than others. Interestingly enough, you can see that the Butcher's Circus PvP mode from the first game, released long after the other expansions, was most likely a trial run for some of the changes in the sequel, such as the presence of the Daze effect or death blow resistance on certain enemies, with moves like Dismas's Wicked Slice, once again ignoring a certain amount of DVR. The campaign and character progression are handled much differently than in the first game. Instead of staying in a single place, you are now on a journey, driving in a stagecoach through different biomes that are equivalent to regions from the first game. On your quest to save the world, you'll have to make decisions about which path to take, with battles, field hospitals, supply caches, and many others awaiting you. At the end of each biome, you reach an inn, where you can resupply, recover, and spend mastery points. These are a new feature in the series, and are now your primary method of improving your characters. You invest a point into an ability as a one-time upgrade, boosting that ability for the rest of that run. The amount of skills you master depends entirely on how many mastery points you manage to get, encouraging you to make more risky decisions in order to be better prepared for the challenges ahead. The inns also allow you to choose which area to go through next on your way to the mountain, where the final boss awaits you. Speaking of bosses, each of the biomes has its own specific level boss, which can be found in a lair guarded by waves of enemies. As of the Minor December patch, slaying a boss and mounting its head on your stagecoach is now necessary for entering the mountain. If you don't, the game will end at the last inn instead. The torchlight from the first game is replaced by the flame and loathing mechanics. The fire that we carry with us to the mountain bestows positive effects when it's bright and negative ones when it's dark. The flame, however, does not grow based on torches we carry, as these are gone, but instead based on the interactions with different nodes on your journey, somewhat similarly to the Curious from the first game. For example, we will very often bump into a group of innocent people trying to run away from the encroaching apocalypse. We'll have a couple options of managing that, with different characters randomly suggesting different solutions. One of them might suggest robbing the poor folk, lowering the flame, while another may want to help them, increasing it. Overall, I feel that this move somewhat invalidated a lot of trinkets and abilities that used to either influence or depend on the light level, as combat items that can raise it are few and far between and you cannot lower it by yourself. The enemies that can lower it are pretty much just ghouls, which is incredibly annoying, especially when they are in pairs, and overall, it feels like the whole system is a lot less interactive, which makes for a nice segue into the previously mentioned curious design decisions. One of the things that I find head-scratching is that the stress meter from the previous game was shrunk down from 100 points to 10 points. This is bad for a couple of reasons. First of all, there's very little wiggle room with a system like that. You'll get stressed randomly on the road while driving, and there's not a whole lot that you can do to prevent that. And while you did get small amounts of stress by walking in the original, a 100-point stress system made it so that randomly getting 5 stress wasn't a big deal unless you severely mismanage your team's stress. Here, however, seemingly everyone and their grandma now deals stress instead of designated enemies in the back. Also, what you'll see a lot of is that when your character gets hit with a crit, they'll get a stress point with a chance for another character to get it as well. Granted, that happened in the original too, but you had more wiggle room, the chance for another character to get stressed seemed lower, and furthermore, it basically seems like the character that was hit gets stressed in response to their friend getting stressed over them being hit. So that's basically 3 stress points between 2 characters on one enemy attack. And then you get a random stress point on a character that had 3 stress points already, and they enter the cranky baby mode, which brings us to what is unfortunately one of the game's major downsides. You see, prior to the release, the developers excitedly spoke of the new relationship system, which seemed like a natural course for the series to take. After all, Darkest Dungeon was about the real-life toll that adventuring would take on adventurers. As such, it made sense to add connections between these adventurers, which, let's admit it, we all held as headcanon while playing the original. And while in theory it was a good idea, in practice it turned out to be a severely crippling part of the game. It has been tuned and tweaked since launch, and on the scrapped roadmap you could see an overhaul of the whole system planned, which is badly needed. In fact, most people found this mechanic to be so annoying that when the bounty hunter was added, Red Hook decided to straight up make him an exception. He can form relationships, relatable by the way. Now, why is that system so bad, you may ask? Well, let's break it down first. Here's how it basically works. Each character has a meter that measures the relationship with every other character that's still alive. Initially, it's neutral, but it can gain positive and negative points. Once you get enough positive points, the relationship is tested and they emerge as, for example, hopeful or amorous. Same for the negative points, but they emerge as bitches, really. Also, while writing this I realized that I can hardly recall the name of any of these afflicted relationships because they all feel very samey, and that's another point that I would like to talk about later. You can get these relationship points by having characters agree on a decision, which again is completely randomly determined, it's not like any of the characters have set morals, by helping each other in battle, and also by using special items at the end. So here are a couple of reasons why the system fails. Virtuous relationships and afflicted relationships replace virtues and afflictions from the original. That already feels like a huge mistake in my opinion. It was one of those defining features of the Darkest Dungeon that when stressed enough, your character would reach a breaking point and either fall apart completely or emerge stronger from it. You try to avoid it as best as you could because the odds were simply not in your favor. You had a much bigger chance of getting an affliction rather than a virtue. But that moment when all hope seemed lost and your character became virtuous, pulled through and saved that whole mission, those are the moments from the first game that you remembered, and you remember them fondly. I don't remember a single interaction between these characters that I would care about, and this again is for a couple of reasons. While Virtues and Afflictions in the first game did an amazing job of characterizing your heroes through barks that were unique to each and every condition that they were in the second game they feel cartoonish. The amorous plague doctor saying, "Love is the purest chemistry," sounds a bit Flanderish in my opinion. She's a scientist, so everything that she says is related to science. The original PD struck me as a bit more complex than that. Furthermore, you also have generic relationship barks that you'll get sick of seeing very quickly. And this brings us to another reason why the relationships in this game aren't very fun. The afflicted ones are obviously bad, and this manifests itself in characters giving each other debuffs and even stopping certain actions during the battle, but so do virtuous relationships. If 2 of your characters are amorous and one of them is a healer, then the other will at times stop them from healing anyone else by saying, "But I thought I was the only one." Even though the developers didn't put any monogamy mechanic in the game and you could technically have everyone be in love with each other. But this also applies to other buffs and other relationships, with the exception of Hopeful, which cripple you in similar ways. Can't move, can't protect, can't heal, can't play the game because I played it the way it was intended. The game basically punishes you for playing well, and it boggles the mind as to how that came to be. And finally, the reason people wanted relationships in the first place is because these characters in the game spent a lot of time with each other, venturing into different forgotten locations, socializing in the hamlet and during camping, and basically getting to know each other over the years. In this game, however, where a single run will last only a couple of hours, these relationships feel forced and rushed. Ironically, they would have felt more natural and fitting in Darkest Dungeon 1, because the formula that the sequel is based on just doesn't lend itself as naturally to that kind of system. And this is all on top of the fact that in this game all characters are basically their canon selves. You no longer have different highwaymen, even if different only in name, quirks and color palette. It's just Dismas all day long. Because of that, as many fans have put it, it no longer feels like your guys, but instead is Red Hook's guys, making the whole relationship system feel even more impersonal. You watch Dismas fall in love over and over again with random teammates, often within the same run, only to break up 20 minutes later because of 2 encounter decisions that apparently were too much for the love to bear. Speaking of which, let's discuss the characters in part 2.